The Labour Party is the agent of increased political repression in Britain. Starmer's government was installed to disarm working-class resistance and destroy the pro-Palestine movement. Labour is a capitalist and imperialist party, thoroughly embedded within the bourgeois state apparatus. It in no way seeks to challenge either the economic wage slavery of workers or existing property relations. And as we have repeatedly seen, it does not reverse, but instead routinely utilises and extends all the repressive, legislative and state means of suppression of the British working class. The following resolution was passed unanimously by the 10th Party Congress of the CPGB-ML. Congress understands that the British political system of parliamentary democracy, like the modern representative state in general, is an instrument of exploitation of wage labour by capital. In Britain's constitutional monarchy, just as in the democratic republic, wealth exercises its power indirectly, but all the more surely, first, by means of the direct corruption of officials, secondly, by means of an alliance of the government and the stock exchange. That's a quote from Engels, Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State, 1884, Chapter 9. The omnipotence of wealth is more certain in a democratic republic, as it does not depend on defects in the political machinery or on the faulty political shell of capitalism. A democratic republic is the best possible political shell for capitalism, and therefore, once capital has gained possession of this very best shell, it establishes its power so securely, so firmly, that no change of persons, institutions, or parties in the bourgeois democratic republic can shake it. Vladimir Lenin, The State and Revolution, 1917, Chapter 1. The City of London, Britain's land and business owning capitalist class, has cemented its domination over the democratic parliamentary system, police force, and all the wider institutions of the British political state and society, as demonstrated in Ella Rawls' pamphlet on A Class Analysis of Britain in the 21st Century. This was amply demonstrated during the bailout of the failing banks in 2008, ensuing austerity, Brexit, Corbyn's ouster from Labour Party leadership, and the COVID stock market bailout, among other things. Labour is a party of imperialism. Congress believes that the Labour Party is integral to the running of the British capitalist state, indistinguishable in its economic and social programme from the Conservative or any other capitalist party. It works tirelessly for the maintenance of British capitalism and still puts forward the notion that what serves the imperialist bourgeoisie serves the whole people, the national interest, and by implication the working class also. Labour, like all bourgeois politicians and parties, never acknowledges the fact that Britain is split into two great hostile camps, the workers and the capitalists. The workers, those who live by selling their labour power, along with their dependents and unemployed, pensioners and working class students, constitute more than 90% of Britain's population. The true capitalists, meanwhile, are far less than 1% of the population. Significantly landed families constitute around 36,000. That's 0.05%, or 1/20th of 1% of Britain's 68 million population. And they own more than half of Britain's land, with much of the rest being under corporate control. The largest 10 landowners have between them more than 1 million acres. This is from K. Carhill, Who Owns Britain and Ireland, published in 2001. 2/3 of land in the UK as a whole, 40 million acres, is owned by 0.36% of the population. 24 million families, meanwhile, share the urban plot of 3 million acres, less than 5% of Britain's land area. The notion of the country being full is a political fantasy. From Review of Who Owns England by G. Shrubsole in The Guardian on the 28th of April 2019. In terms of capital, the concentration is even more stark. There are 5,000 people in Britain who have more than £50 million, 0.007%, or 7,000th of 1%, of whom the richest 350 hold assets of £800 billion, with 57 known individuals multi-billionaires, from the Sunday Times Rich List, 2024. Congress realises that all manifestations of class struggle, derivative of this extreme inequality in property and capital, are collectively characterised by Labour, Tory and media alike as simply bad, ranging from the low-level antisocial, largely relating to mass economic and cultural impoverishment of the working class, through criminal, where property and person is threatened, to terrorist, where there is any threat to the capitalist state monopoly on political governance and violence. All responsibility for the social and behavioural consequences of this inequality are systematically laid at the door of the workers themselves. Congress affirms that Labour is a bourgeois party, embedded within the bourgeois state apparatus, which in no way seeks to challenge either the economic wage slavery of workers or existing property relations, and which does not reverse but instead routinely utilises and extends all the repressive legislative and state means of suppression of the British working class. Lenin noted 105 years ago that, of course, most of the Labour Party's members are working men. However, whether or not a party is really a political party of the workers does not depend solely upon a membership of workers, but also upon the men that lead it, and the content of its actions and its political tactics. The British bourgeoisie, which has had far more experience, democratic experience, than that of any other country, has been able to buy workers over and to create among them a sizable stratum greater than in any other country, but one that is not so great compared with the masses of the workers. This stratum is thoroughly imbued with bourgeois prejudices and pursues a definitely bourgeois reformist policy. Progress for the revolutionary proletariat is slow because the British bourgeoisie are in a position to create better conditions for the labour aristocracy and thereby to retard the revolutionary movement in Britain. From Affiliation to the British Labour Party speech by Vladimir Lenin to the Second Congress of the Communist International on the 19th of July to the 7th of August 1920. Congress recognises that the Starmer administration has already demonstrated that it is fully committed to using and extending all the means at its disposal to repress the working class, and in particular the anti-imperialist, pro-Palestine, progressive and communist workers. With the deepening crisis of capitalism and impoverishment of the masses, there is an increasing drive to war, and an accelerating deterioration in the living standards of workers in Britain and across the globe. Anglo-American imperialism's drive to war against Russia and China, in the Middle East to maintain its grip on the global oil supply, and in Africa for control of her vital human and mineral resources, manifesting in the combination of NATO's war in Ukraine, US, UK, EU, Israeli genocide in Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and the ongoing war in the Congo have resulted in an upsurge in the anti-imperialist and objectively anti-capitalist action of the British working class. Britain has a long history of colonial repression in which Labour has been fully complicit, including in directing Britain's wars in Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Sierra Leone, Syria, Libya, Korea, Malaya, Kenya, South Africa, India, etc., and in running its military and military intelligence. Congress notes as an egregious example the repressive Five Eyes collaboration between the Anglo-Saxon states, Britain, USA, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, to spy upon the communications of the whole world's population, including on the domestic population of Britain, in violation of British domestic law. Congress notes such specific repressive measures as the advent of legislation that suspends habeas corpus, the state having to produce and disclose evidence against citizens that it tries and imprisons, the advent of judge-only closed trials, e.g. the diplock courts used to suppress the Irish Republican movement in particular, but extended since COVID, and regular shootings of British workers on the streets, from Harry Stanley, Dermot O'Neill, John Charles de Menezes, and Mark Duggan, to the recent police assassination of Chris Kaba, among others. Many police murders formerly were related to anti-Irish racism and the repression of the Irish liberation struggle. Now we find most often that young black and Muslim-looking men are the victims, all subsequently tarnished, most without any evidence, as criminals, though almost all have been extrajudicially murdered without cause. Congress understands that the ruling class is once again ramping up its racist rhetoric in the face of its crisis. Elon Musk's campaign to reignite anti-Islam, anti-Pakistani, anti-immigrant sentiment among British workers is entirely aimed at distracting white British workers from the economic troubles caused by the capitalist class themselves, and to misdirect workers' anger at Pakistani grooming gangs. While leading this campaign, designed to divide workers against one another and to separate the white British working class from the cause of Palestine, Labour and Tory have both taken steps to label all anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-genocide, pro-Palestine campaigners as anti-Semitic and as terrorists. Labour installed to disarm working class resistance and destroy the pro-Palestine movement. Congress understands that the last general election of the 4th of July 2024 was called by the capitalist class in circumstances designed to oust the ailing Tory administration of Rishi Sunak and falsely inflate support for the Labour Party. Sir Keir Starmer swept to victory on one of the worst electoral votes since World War I, gaining far fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn received in 2019, and claiming a resounding victory in seats, although just 18% of the voting age population cast a ballot in his favour. Labour was the chosen government of capitalism, and the election was called early precisely to install Keir Starmer, who has pushed ahead with the genocidal wars in the Middle East and Ukraine and increased austerity measures in Britain in the face of growing discontent among workers and growing opposition to the imperialist policy abroad, in particular from the militant and persistent Palestine solidarity movement. Congress notes that Labour's victory was followed swiftly by pogroms and race riots across the country, which have been deliberately stoked, with the Zionists, far-right, Labour government and state forces all coordinating the campaign, and which were given disproportionate press attention. They were followed by talk of increasing repression to clamp down on street violence and extremism, yet since that time, and entirely predictably, the majority of state repression has actually fallen on the pro-Palestine, anti-imperialist solidarity movement. Labour has intensified a three-pronged attack on the working class. 1. Political repression is now increasing, specifically with the attempt to falsely label the anti-imperialist and pro-Palestine movement as racist, anti-Semitic and terrorist, and to use existing anti-racist public order and anti-terror legislation to criminalise progressive workers. 2. Workplace repression is increasing via the weaponisation of the regulatory and disciplinary framework, which is being used to economically sanction workers who speak out against the ruling class's policy on militarism, its war in Ukraine, and especially its genocide in the Middle East. 3. Policing of social media. Congress notes that Labour is keen to utilise existing repressive British legislation, including the Public Order Act, the Criminal Justice Act, and the Terrorism Act 2000, themselves built upon hundreds of years of laws designed to ensure that the privileges of the propertied classes are sacrosanct. Congress notes the recent adoption of the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act of 2022 and the Public Order Act of 2023, which further attacks workers' rights to freedom of speech and political action. This legislation leaves British workers facing up to 10 years in prison for taking part in annoying peaceful protest. In the first weeks of Labour's administration, these provisions were used to hand environmental campaigners from Just Stop Oil 4- and 5-year sentences for taking part in a Zoom call about a planned climate protest. It would be funny if it were not so deeply sinister. Defendants can be banned from mentioning the political or environmental factors that led to action in their defence, and those who might dare to stand outside the court with signs reminding the jurors that they have the right to acquit you according to their consciences, a basic principle, may also be prosecuted for contempt. From Labour's War on Protest by F. Newton, The Tribune, 18th of November 2024. Congress notes high-profile individual cases of repression, including those of Sarah Wilkinson, pro-Palestine independent journalist Asa Winstanley, and Ali Abunimah, online journalists from the pro-Palestine electronic intifada Richard Medhurst, independent, progressive and anti-imperialist journalist Kit Clarenberg, independent journalist at the Grey Zone, former ambassador and anti-war campaigner Craig Murray, the world-renowned British-Palestinian doctor and plastic surgeon Ghassan Abu Sitta, who was operating at the Al-Ali Arab Methodist Hospital in Gaza when the Zionist Israeli Air Force dropped a J-Dam bomb upon its compound, killing hundreds of civilians. Activists returning from the funeral of the assassinated leaders of the Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah and Hashem Safieddine, and many others, including 7 comrades of the CPGB-ML. These comrades were abducted by the state from London streets, from their homes, from airports, and at international borders on spurious charges of racism and terrorism, demonstrating the aggressive attitude not only of the last administration, but of the present one. It is clear that the Labour Party is fully committed to extending the repression of British workers, including those who simply seek to educate, provide information, and do journalism that undermines the capitalist ruling class's lies in support of its genocidal wars. Congress notes that Tony Greenstein remains on bail for the charge of terrorism for daring to question the prohibition of Hamas by the British government, and will remain under harsh bail conditions for an entire year until his delayed trial finally takes place in January 2026. Congress notes that on the 18th of January 2025, Labour ordered the Metropolitan Police to make mass arrests of marchers and organisers of the Palestine demonstrations at the BBC TV Centre in Portland Place. They were protesting against BBC complicity in the genocide in Palestine. The Labour regime and police justified this repression on the grounds that they were protecting the right of Jews to worship at Central Synagogue, over half a mile from the protest. Over 70 arrests as thousands joined pro-Palestine rally in Westminster by W. Mutter and A. France, The Standard, 18th of January 2025. Whatever the nefarious role of the Stop the War organisation, itself part of the left Labour milieu, its complicity with and subservience to the Labour Party, and its complicity in disorganising and limiting the anti-war and Palestine solidarity campaigns in Britain, Labour's repression is as clear as day. It seems likely that this precedent will be utilised by Labour in attempted suppression of the entire Palestine solidarity movement, with wide-ranging removal of British workers' rights to protest. Following the arrests, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper wrote, "Everyone should be able to worship in peace. The Met Police have my support in ensuring that synagogues were not disrupted today." She also shared a Community Security Trust, CST, a Zionist organisation that receives hundreds of millions of pounds in state funding, post saying, "Thank you to the Met Police for ensuring the community could attend Shabbat services peacefully today. A special thanks to all of our volunteers who played a vital role in today's security operation." From Cleverly Overall's top civil servant on funding security for Jewish communities. Jewish News, 29th of February 2024. The latter reference was to the small but pernicious group of Zionist activists from such organisations as Harry's Place, Nasher Jew, Lawyers for Israel, Jewish Medical Association, and the CST, who play the role of Zionist foot soldiers and political police in Britain, actively singling out workers on demonstrations and on social media, in direct communication both with Israeli politicians and state forces. IDF Mossad, British politicians, Labour, Tory, Tommy Robinson, Yaxley, Lennon, etc., and British police. These people trawl our streets, our demonstrations, and our social media profiles, together with the owners of Facebook, Twitter, Cambridge Analytica, Palantir, 77th Brigade, etc., and single out the opponents of British imperialism and Zionism, Palestine solidarity campaigners and anti-genocide campaigners, then work with the British police to politically target and criminalise them. What's more, this action is now being extended to the workplace, and Labour ministers are keen to go further than their Conservative counterparts to prove their loyalty to their capitalist masters. Workplace-based repression in the NHS. In December 2024, Labour Health Minister Wes Streeting met with prominent Zionist campaigning organisations including the Jewish Israeli Medical Association, Community Security Trust, and the Board of Deputies. Streeting then called on regulators to strike off doctors who bring extremist views about Gaza into the workplace. In a statement to The Telegraph, he said, "I expect regulators to investigate any concerns suggesting patient safety is at risk due to discrimination or misconduct by a healthcare professional. Any worker espousing racist or extremist views should know they could end up in front of a disciplinary panel." Victoria Atkins, Streeting's Tory predecessor, had previously warned that tough action against extremism, discrimination or hate speech was vital for public confidence in the health system. When doctors are facing anti-Semitism from their colleagues, will the NHS protect them? By M. Levy, The Telegraph, 19th of December 2024. The Health Secretary told The Telegraph he would enforce a zero-tolerance approach to anyone who uses the conflict in the Middle East as a pretext to attack communities, and promised to urge regulators to discipline doctors and nurses who express racist or extremist views about the Gaza conflict, with measures up to and including being struck off the medical register. From Streeting vows to root out NHS anti-Semitism by E. Croft, The Telegraph, 14th of December 2024. By racist or extremist, it should be understood that Labour and Streeting are weaponising the regulatory framework of the medical, nursing, legal business, professions to take punitive economic and criminal measures against those who protest the Israeli genocide in which Streeting, Reeves, Cooper, Lammy, Starmer and the whole Labour Party are actively involved, fully complicit and legally responsible. Streeting himself was elected by the narrowest of margins in Ilford North over Liane Mohammed, who campaigned as an independent and in particular on the issue of the Gaza genocide, which Streeting backs to the hilt, having taken prominent trips to Israel and accepted individual campaign contributions from Zionist organisations. Indeed, pro-Israel lobbyists have donated to 13 out of Labour's 25 cabinet members since they were first elected to Parliament, including Prime Minister Keir Starmer, his deputy Angela Rayner, Chancellor Rachel Reeves, Foreign Secretary David Lammy, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds, Technology Secretary Peter Kyle, and Pat McFadden, whose responsibilities now include national security. The total value of the donations amounts to over £300,000. Streeting meets regularly with Labour Friends of Israel inside Westminster and the European Leadership Network, ELNET, lobby group, has paid for Streeting and Bridget Phillipson's parliamentary staffers to visit Israel. Labour politicians are not only devoid of morals and open to bribery to support genocide, they are cheap. Labour criminalising workers for social media posts. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has been enthusiastically supporting her predecessor, Suella Braverman's vicious repression of the Palestine solidarity movement. She's on record in Parliament as stating that we, Labour, welcome and support the Tory government's commitment of additional funding for the CST. Were we in doubt? And the arrest of hundreds of peaceful protesters against genocide, facilitating the fiction that this repression was made against anti-Semites, so generating the narrative coordinated and published by the CST and given the blessing of Parliament that allows for further repression. From Anti-Semitism Debate, Hansard, 19th of February 2024. She went on to demand greater use of the Prevent programme against workers expressing opinions that were not in accordance with the Labour Tory capitalist government's diktat, and for more repression based on unsanctioned opinions being expressed on social media. From Violent Disorder Debate, Hansard, 2nd of September 2024. This is not a new phenomenon. Lenin noted the social chauvinism of Labour in 1913, as more of its members were already aligning themselves with the British ruling class against the working class as the First World War approached. In the last issue of the Labour Leader, the organ of the Independent Labour Party, we find the following edifying communication. Naval estimates are being discussed in the British Parliament, i.e. the military build-up to World War I, which Labour had pledged to oppose in the meetings of the Second Workers' International. The Socialists introduce a motion to reduce them. The bourgeoisie, of course, quash it by voting for the government. And the Labour MPs? 15 vote for the reduction, i.e. against the government. 21 are absent, 4 vote for the government, i.e. against the reduction, for war. 2 of the 4 try to justify their action on the ground that the workers in their constituencies earn their living in the armament industries. Does it not sound like our Labour and TUC leadership in 2025? There you have a striking example of how opportunism leads to the betrayal of socialism, the betrayal of the workers' cause. As we have already indicated, condemnation of this treachery is spreading ever wider among British socialists. From In Britain, The Sad Results of Opportunism by Lenin, 12th of April 1913. Congress therefore resolves to 1. Fearlessly champion the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, 2. Fearlessly campaign against Zionism and widely publicize Comrade Harper Bra's books on the subject and the party's writing and analysis, 3. Continue its campaign against the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and against the definition's adoption by any UK institution. 4. Reaffirm and widely disseminate our correct analysis that Labour is an imperialist party, as amply demonstrated by the actions of the Starmer administration. 5. Campaign to expose the Labour Party and all manifestations of left Labourism in the working class movement, working to remove its harmful influence over the working class and organised labour. 6. Campaign for the right to freedom of speech, freedom of conscience and freedom of criticism, discarded by the bourgeoisie in its bid to silence and repress workers and trampled underfoot by this Labour administration. 7. Champion the rights of independent and progressive journalists, wherever possible making common cause with them, to propagate the truth to the working class about the repressive policies of imperialism domestically and abroad. 8. Defend our party comrades from all attempts to criminalise them for their political work and expose and counter-legalise state persecution of the working class at the hands of the police and state. 9. Support the struggle of all workers, particularly the journalists, academics, health workers, and medical professionals being targeted by false accusations of racism, anti-Semitism, and terrorism by the Zionists and Labour imperialists. 10. Support the legal defence of all demonstrators and workers victimised by the repressive state legislation. 11. Campaign against the PREVENT programme as being a means not of preventing radicalisation or terrorism, but of the political policing of British workers. And finally, 12. Campaign for the lifting of repressive legislation and for the protection, restoration and expansion of the rights of the working class to engage in political action for their freedom of speech, freedom of political conscience.